One, two, three, four. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Welcome to Crazy Chester. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Yeah, Crazy Chester's Radio Hour. Crazy Chester's Radio Hour.
Welcome to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. My name is Andreas Werner. I'm a record producer, songwriter, and owner of Crazy Chester Records. My guest today is my good friend, Tommy Talton. This is part 2 of our conversation that we started in the last episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. If you missed it, make sure to check it out as well. Now let's get back to our conversation. Start it off, Tommy. So we're back with Tommy Talton. We left off at the end of the
in
laid
June
back
of 1978. No, 74.
74. So after that, studio work and live work with Cowboy continued, and you'd also record a 4th album that came out as Cowboy.
Yeah, that was produced by our friend Sam Whiteside. May he rest in peace. He was a wonderful man. Yeah, that was called Cowboy. And that was done in 77. And that was about when Capricorn was headed for its first...
The end of its first chapter.
The end of its first demise, I suppose.
So there was that album, but then there was more session work for you too. You did a project with Paul Butterfield.
Yeah, up at Woodstock. I went up and, let me see, my friend Ben Keith, who Ben, had played with Neil Young a lot and with Tim Drummond. And Tim and I were pretty good friends. And they brought me in to join them in Woodstock to do some sessions. Ben Keith was going to did produce, and we did some songs with Paul Butterfield, Tim Drummond, Ben Keith, me, Chris Parker on drums, and Ben producing, and they were fun, great sessions. The little bit we played, we did a lot of good timing, but not a whole lot of. We did the music, but it didn't turn out too. It wasn't well received by Albert Grossman, who was, of course, managing Butterfield and owned the entire town of Woodstock
and Bearsville Records.
And Bearsville Records, where we were recording it and all that. So, anyway, it was a couple weeks and fun and wonderful working with those guys.
There was another project. I think it was a Corky Lane project. Who was in Mountain?
Yeah, Corky played drums in the West Bruce and Lang. Corky Lang.
Yeah.
Mountain, and Corky came to Macon and recorded.
And he had some unknown British guitar player with him too, didn't he?
You talking about Eric Clapton?
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, no, he didn't have him with him actually, but we were doing. Corky, by the way, didn't want to play any drums on his solo album. He wanted to do the Corky Lang album with his songs and him playing acoustic guitar. And that's what we were doing. And we were in the middle one night of doing some one of his tunes. We were working on something, and Eric Clapton. Eric had I think he had a gig that he had done that night in Atlanta, and he and Corky knew each other well. And Corky said, "Why don't you come down here?" You know, and so later on that night, after Eric finished playing his gig in Atlanta, him with Patty Boyd, Miss Layla, they came down to Macon, and Eric played on a tune with us, you know. Real nice. We had fun. He and I had fun. I can't even tell you what went down with some of that stuff, because it's just better left alone. But it wasn't anything bad. It was fun. But Eric was real nice. You know, I had a solo on the song that we were working on when he arrived, and I said, "Eric, you want to play the solo on this?" He said, "Oh, no, it's you're the guitar player on this one. I'm just sitting in. I'll play rhythm, and let's do it."
And there were other memorable sessions, as you said earlier. You know, sometimes one project might be an extension of another one, and some more memorable records. You ended up playing acoustic on the song "Pony Boy" on the Brothers and Sisters album by the Allman Brothers.
Dickey asked me to join him on that. He played the dobro on that, and I love that tune. And I played the acoustic rhythm on that with him, and I thought I played on something else on there, but I don't remember what now.
And you played on his first solo album too?
Yeah.
And there's some other a little more. I always thought it was kind of interesting or odd that Kitty Wells will come down to Capricorn to cut a record.
Yes, I know. And it was
Wells
her
record?
Yeah, Kitty Wells. She had already done at that point in time. I heard the number 43 albums, and her husband was her manager, and she. I don't know, I guess he was thinking with this Southern thing happening, Southern rock thing, was this new musical wonder. And he, as her manager, thought, you need to break out of Nashville. And it was the first time she'd ever recorded outside of Nashville, actually, I think. And it was a joy working with her. She was a wonderful, sweet woman.
There was a version of Bob Dylan's Forever Young.
Yeah, that was my idea for that. What happened was, while in Atlanta doing the photo cover for the photo session for the cover of the Boyer and Talton album, I met a guy. He was down from New York. The photographer was Al Clayton, a wonderful man, and I have since become friends with his daughter, Jenny. But she's a great photographer in her own right. But her father, you should Google Al Clayton photographer sometime. There's way too much to even tell you how much he'd done. But we were at his studio, and the director or designer was brought down. His name was Richard Mantell, and he was brought down from New York, and he was kind of like the director, and Al was the actual photographer that set up the scenes and did what the designer asked. And I must say, it's a cool cover, the way it turned out. But while on break during the photo session, I was talking to Richard, and we were talking about our favorite album covers. And I said, "Wow, one of my favorites. Have you ever seen I said, Richard, have you ever seen the cover of Thelonious Monk's Underground album? He said, yeah, I have seen that. It's great. He said, in fact, I won a Grammy for doing that one. I said, are you joking? He said, no. He said, I designed that cover. Check that out sometime. Everyone out there, Google Thelonious Monk Underground. Check out that album cover. It's wonderful. So many things to see in that photograph. It's just wonderful the way it looks. But that's one of my favorite album covers. And it turned out that Richard, who designed that cover, had somehow with him, he had a test pressing of Bob Dylan's Planet Waves album. It had not even been released yet. I don't remember how he turned up with that. Maybe he was working with Dylan on some photographic design or something. I don't know. But he gave me this test pressing of Planet Waves, and I took it back to Macon with me from Atlanta and was playing it and digging it and all that. And Forever Young, that was the original, the release of that song that has been done so many times now. But that was no one had heard it at that time. And we were doing the Kitty Wells album at that time. And I said, Johnny, who was producing, I think it'd be cool if we, could get her to do this song, this new Bob Dylan song that really has not been released yet. And we did it. I think we even put a rush on it, kind of like Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young put the rush on Ohio to get it out because it was so pertinent to the times. They got that record out, I think, in 2 or 3 days. But there was some kind of rush put on a single by Kitty Wells doing Forever Young at the time, too. Because, as I said, Dylan had, I don't think his album was released yet with that on it.
Yeah. Somebody else you worked with, I guess around the same time, was Billy Joe Shaver. How did that come
yeah.
about?
Yeah, that was really fun.
Did he come down to Macon too?
Yeah. He was down, he came to Macon with Bob Johnson, producer. Bob produced the Highway 61 Revisited with Bob Dylan. And good guy. And we did Billy Joe. I don't remember which title we did that first session. I forget the title of that particular album, but it was a hoot to do that. I remember right at the beginning when we were deciding, well, Bob and Billy Joe were deciding. We were just hired guns, ready to play whatever they needed us to. Bob said, well, Billy Joe, which songs are we doing? Billy Joe had a long old legal pad sheet of paper, and had song titles all the way down one side and 3/4 of the way down the other side of just titles and of songs that he wanted to record. And Bob would say, well, what do you think? Should we do Thunderbird? And, oh yeah, we got to do that one. We can't leave that one off. What about Honky Tonk Heroes? Oh, yeah, I think we need to do that one too. It went all the way down the list. There wasn't a one that Billy Joe thought we shouldn't do, So Bob had to take that into his own hands and just forget about asking Billy Joe. So we had a hoot doing that music. And Billy Joe, I'm real fortunate to have become a good friend of his since then. In fact, I wrote a tune about him. The Man from Down Near Waco is inspired by Billy Joe. It's about how he affected me and what a wonderful man he is, what a great spirit. Uncomplicated, straight from the heart. In fact, speaking of heart, the movie Crazy Heart, I would say that's about Billy Joe too. I would
Okay.
say Jeff Bridges' character, not many would argue that that's pretty much Billy Joe.
Okay. Yeah. Did Johnny Rivers come down to Capricorn too?
Johnny Rivers came down and he had a song. He was jumping on that Southern rock bandwagon like everybody was at that time. And he had a song called Georgia Peach. We recorded that one song and zip, he was gone.
Okay. But somebody else you did more work with was Bonnie Bramlett.
Oh, Bonnie.
And who's
yeah.
still a friend.
Well, Bonnie was out. Bonnie, we were all very close, and she was out on the road with Cowboy. You know, we would back her up, and she would sing with us. And
She recorded It's Time on one
she
of her albums.
well, that was the title of the album, Scott's song, It's Time. Yeah, great version she sang.
And then towards the end of Capricorn, and you mentioned it earlier briefly, you along Bill Stewart and Johnny Sandlin put out an album called Happy to Be Alive.
Yeah, that was
in
actually
76 that I believe was not really, you started that without an album in mind. It was just different sessions. and
yeah, it was
things.
just something that happened. Again, that's why I continue to say it was such a wonderful time, because things like that would happen. We were, me, Johnny, and Bill Stewart sitting in the studio, and believe we were waiting for Dickey to come in and overdub some guitar on Ramblin' Man or something, Blue Sky, and we were waiting and waiting, and Dickey got hung up doing something, and Johnny said, well, we're all here, me, him, and Bill, and he said, Tommy, you got any new stuff? I said, yeah, here's one. Showed it to him. We went out, literally, got up, went out, mic'd up the acoustic, and drums were already mic'd, ready to go, and Johnny picked up the bass, and we recorded a song that I had written called Help Me Get It Out, and recorded it very quickly. And the next day, Johnny showed it to Phil Walden, and Phil said, man, I like that. Why don't you guys just go ahead and do an album? So there we went. And it essentially was an album of, I think it was all my songs except for Johnny wanted to do Working in a Coal Mine. And so we did that one. And it was different. We actually did that. We recorded that whole album, I believe, in. It must have been. I don't know when we could have fit it in, but it was sometime in '74 when we weren't doing the Laid Back tour. Somehow we fit it in then, because I remember we flew out to LA to do the cover for that one, and I remember seeing a date of like 1975 when it was released, so it had to be recorded in late 74, early 75, somewhere around there. I think Wikipedia has the actual facts on that.
Okay. And you guys went out and did a few shows too, as
TSS.
TSS.
Well,
Tell me about
TSS
that.
TSS was a band for a small while out of Macon. Bill Stewart on drums and myself, and a great guitar player named Richie Kicklighter, and a wonderful organist, keyboard player, many people know, Neil Larson, and a bass player from Macon there, a local Maconite named Calvin Arline, very soulful bass player, who was also the father of 11 children. He and his wife, what else could they do? They also ran a nursery. I think half the kids at the nursery were
Their own.
theirs.
And somebody else, you told me, joined you guys too occasionally in
What?
Buzzy Featon.
Buzzy didn't play with TSS, no. Buzzy joined us on the Laid Back tour a couple of times. He did not join us on stage, but we played around together at sound checks and stuff like that, and hung out. When we were out in California, we hung with Buzzy a lot up in the hills of Hollywood and and Malibu. But it was quick. We were moving awful fast back then. As I said, 35 cities in 50 days doesn't give you much time to stay in one place.
Yeah. Actually, just yesterday we talked about Little Feat and Lowell George, and you became friends with him too, I guess, while on the road with them.
Actually, we met before we'd ever done a gig together. I met Lowell at a place called Richards that was a rockin' place back in the early 70s in Atlanta. It was the place to play back then. And that's where we met. And later on it turned out that we were Cowboy and Little Feat. Cowboy, Little Feat, and Marshall Tucker played a lot together. But I remember the first time Cowboy played with Little Feat was in Houston, and Little Feat was a four-piece then with Roy Estrada on bass, a former Mothers of Inventionist, as Lowell was, yeah. That was a great band.
Yeah, and obviously you both were, great slide players. Did you ever, talk about playing guitar, or was it more just a friendship?
No, we didn't. Don't do that much. I never have, with guitar players. I don't ever talk, You mean things like, well, how'd you do this, or what did you do?
Yeah, what kind of tuning are you using?
Well, we have. There are many discussions about what kind of tuning was that, but not much on technique or anything. Just mostly with Lowell and I, it was mostly just about how much we loved. We would talk about lyrics and just simple song structure and studio recording techniques and ideas, and that took up hours of conversation. I think it was in 77 when Cowboy had just recorded that Cowboy album that we were talking about earlier with Sam Whiteside, our last album for Capricorn. And I was living in Magnolia Springs, Alabama at the time, with Chip Miller, our drummer. And I remember while off the road there, I was on the phone with Lowell. He was in the studio in Louisiana, and he was recording his solo album, Thanks, I'll Eat It Here. And it wasn't long after that it was 3 years later, but that he was gone while on tour for that album after it came out.
So that first life of Cowboy in the 70s came to an end towards the end of the 70s, right?
Yeah. Like in 79, I was out in Austin, Texas, producing a talented songwriter out there named Stephen Doster. I was asked to come out there and help put a recording together for him in the studio, and he was good. He still does it. I believe he sent me just a couple years ago. I got some of his latest stuff. We've gotten back in contact with each other. In fact, I need to call Steve. I'll call you right after you hear this recording.
And if not, call me.
Yeah, if not, call me.
So how or why did that Cowboy thing end then? Was that like, had that something to do with the demise of Capricorn and you guys not being on a label? Or?
We had been, in 75 it broke up for a while, and the personnel had been changing every 6 or 7 months, and it was just a time thing. It was time to move on. Again, no animosity or anything, just it's the way it goes.
Yeah.
That's the way things change. Change happens.
Yeah. And while it's not quite the end of the Cowboy story either, you certainly were done for a while, and I don't quite have a timeline for this, but I'm just gonna throw a few projects at you that you were part of. One was 360. Can you tell me a little bit about 360?
Yeah, that was in Atlanta, again with Bill Stewart on drums. Joe Rudd, a great guitar player from Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and another Tuscaloosa musician, Court Pickett, sang and played bass.
He was in Sailcat too.
Court was also in Sailcat, Johnny Weiker's Fantasy Child band. It was Sailcat was all his. He even had a comic strip idea to go along with it, a comic book. He was quite the creator.
And you got
Johnny Weiker.
Yeah, and you ended up writing a song with him too, "Hard Driving Man."
Yeah. Yeah, he had 2 lines, and they were great, to this tune. I'm rolling like a freight train, thundering through a cold rain, higher than a jet plane, hotter than a blue flame. I'm a hard driving man, doing the best I can. And whenever I was driving through Decatur, Alabama, and I was there to see Johnny, or just passing through from Nashville to Atlanta or whatever, I would stop by and spend a couple days with Johnny. In fact, I was staying for the summer on Johnny's boat on the river there in Decatur. The last time I talked to Lowell in 1980, Lowell and he was in D.C. and was going to Atlanta the next night on his tour for his solo album, and we had arranged to meet in Atlanta, and he never made it. But Weiker had these 2 lines to the song, and every time I saw him, he said, "Listen to this," and he'd play me those 2 lines. Finally, I just said, "Johnny, sit down, get a guitar out. I got mine with me. We're going to finish this song tonight." And finally, after listening to those 2 lines for about 3 years, we finally worked it out.
Yeah. Did 360, you guys went into the studio and recorded something that
We went into Paul Hornsby's studio, a makeshift studio actually, in his house at the time, and recorded, I think, 4 songs. Yeah, we worked together, I don't even know how long. We just did some Atlanta gigs, and that was pretty much it. It was just kind of a passing fancy, something to keep busy for a little while before moving on.
What about the convertibles?
The convertibles, Scott and Topper Price had already been playing in that band, and they were playing at a joint in Montgomery, Alabama, and he told the owner there about me, apparently, and Johnny Sullivan, wonderful friend of ours, owned the place, and he said, "Well, get him to come on over and let's rock." So that's how I started driving from Atlanta over to Montgomery and playing with them. Of course, the first night I was supposed to be there, I was driving hadn't even gotten out of the Atlanta city limits and got stopped for an expired tag and put in jail. So I didn't show up that night, and they had to send, I think that they sent the money for me to get out and pay for that so I could get over the next night and play the gig. But that was how I was introduced to Johnny Sullivan. I was fresh out of jail the first night I played at his place.
Did you guys cut some demos at Muscle Shoals Sound with the Convertibles? Or were you not in the band when they did?
Yeah, we did some. When Richard Bell was in the... I brought Richard into the Convertibles. We knew each other from the Atlanta scene. And yeah, we did some demos at the new Muscle Shoals Sound, which is now Cypress Studios.
Cypress Moon.
It's Cypress Moon. And yeah, it was the old National Guard Armory. And Muscle Shoals Sound had moved from the old Jackson Highway address
where you did
to their
Cowboy album.
Where we did Five Will Get You 10.
Right.
And so many other things were done there, of course.
Yeah. But you, at the second location of Muscle Shoals Sound, you recorded some, I guess, essentially publishing demos. In 80?
I did.
Okay.
I signed a individual songs publishing contract with Muscle Shoals Sound Publishing, which was David Hood, Roger Hawkins, Barry Beckett, and Jimmy Johnson, and me and Roger and David Hood, Roger Hawkins, and I went into the studio a couple times over there and recorded 6 songs that I had signed to have them publish for me. And 2 of them turned out to be quite a good deal that I'd done that, because they played them for Levon Helm when he came into town to record there. And Jimmy Johnson was producing it. And they did 2 of my songs out of those 6 that they showed him. And
that was the Got song and Give a Little Bit.
The Got song and Give a Little Bit. Yeah.
So, did you already know Levon at that point?
No, I didn't. I had been listening intently to everything the band did since 1969 when I lived in LA, when Music from Big Pink was put out. And had actually at the time had some close contacts, people that I knew them, but we never crossed paths. But when they first went out on tour for Music from Big Pink, they were playing in San Francisco, and me and the people I was living with in LA, and another couple friends, we all went in a convoy up to San Francisco to see the band playing all the music from Big Pink. And in fact, Ovie Sparks, who you know, was with us, and he had a little portable Uher, U-H-E-R, Uher, tape recorder, and he taped their show. And when we listened to it later, because there was nothing to look at, there was no show, there was no choreography, so it wasn't a visual thing unless it was enough for me, but it wasn't enough for most people, for the people who wanted to see spandex and choreography. But man, you listen back to that and you go, I went, wow. I knew I was liking it, but I had no idea they were sounding that good. It was cool.
Yeah. So how did you end up meeting him and some of those guys?
Well, after he recorded those 2 songs of mine, I went by to see David and Roger, and Levon was still there, and we were introduced, and he was getting ready to go out and do a gig in Memphis, and he said, "Tommy, why don't you come on with me? Let's come to Memphis with me, and I'll do my gig, and I'd like you to come to the show." So I didn't have anything else to do, so rode over to Memphis from Muscle Shoals, and then the next day, actually, they had a couple days off, and Levon, the wonderful human being that he was, he said, "Tommy, let's go down. I'll show you Helena." So we went down to Helena, Arkansas, his home base, and he took me to his favorite barbecue joint, bought me a gallon of barbecue sauce and a big old ham that had been smoking for hours and hours, 18 hours or something. And then I said, "Well, Levon, I got to get back to Atlanta." "Oh, come on, we're going to, I forget, St. Louis or something." I said, "No, thanks, man, but I guess I could have just continued the trip, but I had things to do." And it was great meeting him.
And then your friend Richard Bell and your other friend we haven't talked about, Jimmy Weeder,
Yeah.
later became members of the band. And I guess
Right.
whenever they came through town, you would see them.
Yeah, and they played in Tampa when I was back down in Central Florida back in, I don't know, 1990, right before I moved to Europe. They were playing in Tampa, and I went over and saw them there. That's the last time I saw the band. By the time I got back from Europe, they didn't exist anymore.
So you went to Europe, to Luxembourg, for a good amount of time, and you had a band over there called the Rebelizers.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that band, and I know you guys ended up cutting a record over there too.
Yeah. I went over there because I met a Belgian bass player named Christian Janssen in Orlando at that same time, in around 1990. It was 91, I guess. It's hard to remember those years right now, but Christian and I hung out with each other for a couple days. He was on holiday from Luxembourg with his girlfriend from Germany, and when he went back to Europe, he was playing with a guy named Matt Dawson, and Matt was living in Luxembourg and was a songwriter, and his brother, by the way, Julian,
Yeah, I know.
did a lot in Nashville, and Julian Dawson, but Matt was, I think Julian's younger brother, but anyway, Christian said to Matt, "I met this guitar player when I was in America. His name's Tommy Talton." And Matt said, "Are you kidding me? You met Tommy? He played on my favorite album of all time." And it happened to be, he loved the Laid Back album. He said, "I wonder if we could get him to come over and tour with us for 6 weeks." And they called me up, and I hadn't been to Europe at that time, believe it or not. And I said, "Sure, I'll do it." And went over there. We rehearsed for a couple weeks, and then did 6 weeks tour. And I met Peter Barron from England on the drums, who also plays with Albert Lee, and he was in a band called Hogan's Heroes with the pedal steel player Jerry Hogan. And that band, with Mike Bell on piano, Hogan's Heroes, they back up Albert Lee whenever he does Ireland, Finland, Luxembourg, France, England.
Yeah.
And so that's where that whole connection went. And when that tour was over with Matt, Peter on drums, Christian on bass, and myself, we didn't want to stop playing. So Peter calls up his friend, piano player Mike Bell from London, says, "You want to join us and we'll start a band here in Luxembourg?" And we did that. And And believe it or not, this big cigarette conglomerate, cigarette company in Luxembourg at the time was giving out money to different art projects, and musical projects. And they gave us the money to, didn't ask for anything back. They just wanted to donate money to somebody. And they gave us the money to record this album. And we went to a little village called Schifflange in Luxembourg and recorded what became an album called Someone Else's Shoes, which is the title to one of my songs. And we called it the Rebelizers. That was in 1995.
And didn't you also become the house band for a local TV show?
Yes, Christian, the bass player, and I, he found a gig in Brussels, and it's a 2-hour drive from Luxembourg City to Brussels. And one summer, I think it was 97 or 98, we would drive over every Thursday to the place where the Atomium is, where I forget which World's Fair it was, the 1960 World's Fair?
Yeah, I wouldn't know.
Could have been 64. But anyway, there was a World's Fair in Brussels, and the Atomium was built for that. And on those grounds was what they had was the American theater there. That there was an American exhibit there for the World's Fair, and they did television shows from that studio. And we became essentially, the Paul Schaefer band type deal for the Letterman thing. We became that for these two Flemish guys who were hosting a Flemish talk show called Summer Kuren, which I believe means cure for summer.
Yeah.
And it was fun. We'd go over every Thursday and we'd rehearse and go through the show, kind of a dress rehearsal thing with all the guests. And we had to come up with songs that we would play as the guest was introduced, as they walked from off stage to their seat.
Yeah, cue music.
And we would, depending on what the guest was, we would come up with songs to play for that 15-second walk. And I tell you, that's an amazing thing. It's quite a discipline. It's a great discipline to learn. Man, when you're doing television shows like that, the talk show band thing, you have to sit there for 10, 15 minutes doing nothing. And then boom, when they introduce whatever and there's a break coming up or going to a commercial or a guest is coming out, it's like from nothing for 10 minutes to boom, you've got 10 seconds to be right on it, and you don't have time to warm up and work into a groove. It's like you got to be grooving from the instant you start. It's a really great discipline. I learned a lot from that.
Yeah. How long did you end up staying in Europe?
Most of the 90s, I don't know, 93 to 2001, something like that.
And then you came back and released an American version of Someone Else's Shoes, featuring some of those tracks and some different things.
Yeah.
And that was essentially the first album that had your name on it. That was a Tommy Talton album.
Yeah, that was the first real solo album. The TSS album was kind of a solo album, but because it was all my songs. But yeah, that was the first real solo effort, as they say.
And then the next one was a live record called Live Notes from Athens, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was fun too. A lot of people tell me how much they love the spirit of that album. Everybody says they like to drive real fast and put it on loud and roll the windows down, which is a good compliment. But what's funny is we were doing a set, the Tommy Talton Band was doing a set at the Foundry in Athens, Georgia. And when the night was over, Michael, one of the sound men, comes up to me and says, "Hey, by the way, if you want to use it, I happened to record the whole night on my laptop on Pro Tools, and it was sitting there waiting to be mixed, you know." So I said, "Yeah, great." So the whole time we were playing, we had no idea we were even being recorded, and I spent 2 or 3 days going over to Athens from here at home in Marietta, and we mixed it, me and Wes Delk and Michael Hughes, and put it out.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
One night you don't have an album, and then 3 days later it's out.
And sometimes it probably doesn't hurt not knowing that you're being recorded.
Oh, it helps a lot. It eliminates a lot of possible stress.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be any stress, but you can't help thinking, don't screw this one up.
Right. So, but then you went into the recording studio not too long after that to record a proper studio album called Let's Get Out of Here.
Yeah.
Which is one of my favorites of yours. It has your version of the song that Levon cut on it.
Give a little bit. Yeah.
And then you did another album called Until After Then, which has the Billy Joe Shaver tribute.
Man from Down Near Waco. Yeah, those were done at in Graysville, Alabama, with David Keith at his studio there, Gintown Studios. He and I worked real well together. I liked working with him there.
And you got some of the Muscle Shoals session guys to come help you at David Hood and Kelvin Holly and
David Hood,
Thurman,
Kelvin, Billy Earhart from the Amazing Rhythm Aces, and many other groups. Yeah, Kelvin Holly, and of course, we're all pretty close friends, and I'm thankful that they wanted to come down and help.
Yeah. And your most recent solo album, Somewhere South of Eden, came out a couple of years ago.
Yeah. That one was done different than anything I've ever done. I started Brian Owings on drums, and Brian's such a great drummer. He plays with him and Tony Joe White. It's great. Tony Joe White, his wah-wah pedal, and Brian Owings on drums, and that's it. Just the two of them. Touring, they went around the world doing that.
They did, and
it was...
Tony Joe called him Fleetwood Cadillac. That was his nickname.
That's what he called Brian?
Yeah.
I agree. Because I love Fleetwoods. I've had 3.
And then you built the tracks from
Yeah, well,
there.
I asked Brian, I said, here's what we'll do, Brian. You find a bass player that wants to do it, tell him about me, and you find somebody that you like playing with, and we'll do it. Just the 3 of us lay down basic tracks, and we did that. We cut 10 basic tracks, the 3 of us, in 2 days, up at David Pinkston's studio at his house called Boomtown Recorders.
And David is somebody else.
David
who goes back way back.
David goes back to
Capricorn.
the mid-'70s with Capricorn, and that's where we met so many years ago. But that was a strange way to record, because some of these songs that I went up and did with Brian and Chris Donahue, I don't know if we mentioned his name, but both of them play with Emmylou Harris's band, and Chris has a mile-long list of accolades and awards and such. Great bass player and musician. But half the songs had no lyrics, and a couple of them didn't even have structure. And we all just sat there with headphones on, and I would play acoustic on the scratch track, and I would speak to Brian and Chris as we went along, saying, all right, let's go to a verse here, and here's the solo section, let's bring it up a bit, you know. All right, dynamically, let's pull down here and go into a interlude before the last verse, you know. I had never done it that way before.
And then you
and I don't want to do
write
it
to
again.
those tracks.
Huh?
And then you would write to those tracks.
And then I would write lyrics to those, architectures, and later on have the wonderful Steve Kahn on keyboards. He played on 4 or 5 tracks, organ and accordion, and John Ginty played on a song called "Waiting on the Saints." He put some growling organ on that tune. Ike Stubblefield here in Georgia, unbelievable B3 player. He played on one of the tracks, "I Surrender," and which, by the way, Spooner Oldham and I kind of wrote together. We started it, and then I finished it off, and I don't think Spooner even remembered that we'd written it. Because it had been so long.
Yeah.
And I said, Spooner, remember that song we were messing around with 17 years ago? Something like that. No, I don't. Well, anyway, you're half writer on it. I'm putting you down. But Ike Stubblefield put some organ on that, and I put electric guitars on it and sang it, and got Deborah Reese, a singer here in town, Atlanta, to help me on a couple songs with harmonies, and Jeff Mosier, wonderful banjo player and bluegrass player. He was in Bruce Hampton's original Aquarium Rescue Unit band, and he and I did, he helped me with a harmony part and a banjo part on a song called "Don't Go Away Sore." But that was not the way to do a project. I don't want to do that again.
But one of my all-time favorite vocal performances of you, or if not my favorite one, is on that record, and that's the title track. To me, that's like
South of Eden.
That's probably my favorite vocals of one of my favorite songs of yours for sure.
Well, thank you.
And you got some interesting stuff. "I Surrender." You got an instrumental on there because
Poblano.
that is beautiful. You know.
Yeah,
piece of music
I stupidly forgot to mention Chuck Lavelle, a longtime friend. Scott Boyer, Chuck Lavelle, and myself all shared a house on Pierce Avenue in Macon back when Chuck was just beginning. I think he had gotten the job playing with Mac Rebenak, Dr. John, at that time. So, and Scott and I, of course, were on the road with Cowboy, and Chuck was out with. He was out before that with Alex Taylor a lot, and Chuck played some beautiful piano on the only instrumental I've ever recorded, Poblano, which is
your favorite pepper.
My favorite Mexican dish, although Pollo Ranchero is taking it over quickly. But stuffed poblano peppers, if they're done right, are mucho bueno.
Yeah. So, ever since you came back from Luxembourg, you've pretty much been focusing on your solo career. But every now and then, the ghosts of your past keep haunting you in different forms. First of all, you along with Scott Boyer, Johnny Sandlin, Paul Hornsby, Leroy Purnell, Bill Stewart, and Bonnie Bramlett, I guess.
Yeah.
The Capricorn
Rhythm section. Yeah.
And you cut a live album with Johnny and,
Yeah.
and played out. How was it,
Oh, that was
going back to that?
That was great. I mean, because we're all so close through the years, and it was great to do a project. It was great to see. First of all, it was great to see Johnny out playing, because he hadn't done that, and I guess he was out in the early '90s some with the Decoys. I guess
For a little while.
when I was in Europe, I don't know how much. I didn't really ever ask Scott or Johnny about how much they played together as the Decoys, but it was great to be playing with Johnny. Well, everybody, and what a band, I mean, like, hard to beat.
Yeah.
Hard to beat the solidarity there.
And all those songs, all of you could draw from too. That's another thing. It's just like
Yeah, all
the
the
material.
Eddie Hinton stuff and Scott stuff and my stuff, and Leroy had a couple tunes on the live album, and we that too didn't last so long. I think we played 1, 2, 4 gigs, 5.
But did that lead to that first Cowboy reunion, or is that two different things?
I don't think it necessarily. I guess, see, I had come back from Europe at that time, and you're talking about 04, 05, I think, and I had been back. I was in Florida for a year, and then I got back into Atlanta with my wonderful wife Patty. We reunited also. We were together in 1980 and kind of had to go our separate ways back then, and then reunited. When I came back from Europe, we ran into each other. And Gadsden is where we were doing the Capricorn Rhythm section stuff, playing at a blues club there called the 2nd Street Blues. And I guess when I was around Johnny that much then, Scott and I and Johnny were all together. Johnny had the idea, I wonder if we could get all the original members of Cowboy back together and do another one. We did that, and I must say it was a wonderful thing, and it was like something like 38 years between albums.
Yeah. And it took over 10 years from those first sessions to the record coming out.
We recorded in November of '07 with all the original members, and then we did some songs with close friends through the years: Randall Bramlett, Bill Stewart, Charlie Hayward, Kelvin Holly, Ricky Hirsch,
David Hood
from Wet Willie, David Hood. All those guys joined Scott and I, and we did some more songs. There are 4 songs on the album by all the 6 original members. And George Clark, it turns out, passed away, I don't know, 7 or 8 months after we did those sessions. But it took, as you said, it took another 9 years or 10 years to finally. It was hung up on business legalities for many of those years, and when that was finally taken care of, thank goodness, we finished it all up before Johnny and Scott had to move on to bigger and better things.
And in the meantime, Cowboy started doing live reunions every now and then. Usually with Bill
we did
Steele.
one in 2010. We recorded the live one in Macon, Georgia in September, I think, of 2010. And we did 2 or 3 other reunion gigs.
Yeah, and I actually met you at one of those. You did one
Yeah.
at Chastain Park, maybe.
Oh yeah,
2013,
Chastain Park in
something
Atlanta.
like that.
We did a night of. it was called the Capricorn Experience, and Bruce Hampton was there, and Chuck and most of Sea Level was there. Wet Willie was there, and Cowboy was there. Is that it?
Colonel Bruce came up and sat in on one of
Colonel
your
Bruce
guys'
sang
songs.
with Cowboy.
But yeah, I think that was it, and it was a great night of music.
It was fun. Yeah.
I was already friends with Scott, and I
Yeah.
came down with him, and that's how we met.
That's how we met.
And then shortly after that, Scott got sick for the first time, severely. And then when he came back from being sick, the two of you with Nancy Thurman played at the 38 Songwriters Festival, a songwriter type
Yeah.
of show.
Yeah.
And I was there in the audience too, and I'm like, I would like to capture this. And then maybe a year or so later, we got the opportunity to actually record one of those performances
Yeah.
at the Nut House in Muscle Shoals.
Yeah, that was a good night.
And
Very good.
it was kind of almost similar than what you mentioned about the live album that you did in Athens.
Yeah.
There's like, we didn't go in because we wanted to,
To
make
make
a
an
record,
album,
but I was
yeah.
like, while we're in here, let's record.
While we're playing, we might as well record it and see what happens. Yeah.
And I'm still really proud of that
Yeah, it's
moment.
you
it's-
did a wonderful job on that in every way, and the spirit of the crowd and the night and the music was all happening. Yeah, it's neat.
Yeah. And after that, we became friends. I'm proud to say.
I am proud too.
And we got to work on different things. And we're almost at the end here, and I know I've been monopolizing your time here for a while, but
That's fine.
we did a tribute night to the band and to the Last Waltz.
Yeah.
To commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Last Waltz, and I asked you and Scott to both be featured performers on it, and that to me was a fun night too, because we got to revisit the songs that Levon recorded of yours among band classics.
Yeah, that was cool.
And
What a band that night.
that was a fun band for sure. And you mentioned it earlier, we lost Johnny, and for me especially losing Scott pretty much a year ago. That was while I guess the writing was on the wall somewhat, it certainly came as a surprise to me.
It'll be a year in 3 days.
So anyways, just I'm just really proud of the fact that that I got to work with the two of you on certain
Well,
things.
I'm glad you and I are still working together.
And
We
that's
have-
what I was about to say. I'm even more excited about what all
we can
might
do.
come.
We've got a lot of work to do. We better
Yeah,
stop talking and
right. Go to work.
work.
Get those guitars out of the corner.
Dust them off. Get them vibrating.
Anyway, but to cap this off, thank you so much for those past couple hours, sharing your history in such an extensive way with me and with all the listeners. And I wish you all the best of luck, especially health-wise too. And
Yeah,
I
thank
just
you.
look forward to all the music that even if I'm not part of it, I'm just like looking forward to hearing more Tommy Talton music.
Well, thank you, Andreas. It's great. We'll do it.
We'll do it.
We'll do it together.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And,
All right. Thank you, and thanks y'all for listening. Treat each other kind.
Yeah. Until next time.
All right. After all is said and done, after we have run and run, what will What will we do when it all is over? I hope we stay together. I hope we'll always be friends. I hope we always stay friends. After all is said and done.
This was the 49th episode of the Crazy Chester Radio Hour. We taped it at Tommy Talton's house outside of Atlanta. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to check out our earlier episodes and subscribe to the Crazy Chester Radio Hour on iTunes or check it out on YouTube, SoundCloud, TuneIn, or Stitcher. That's it for today. Until next week.